Welcome to our podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you're doing well. I want to start today's episode with a message from one of our listeners. The message said, "I've been learning English for years. I understand quite a lot. I can read, I can listen, but I still don't think in English. I always translate, and because of that, my speaking feels slow."
That's a great question. And honestly, it's one of the most common concerns among language learners.
I think a lot of people have heard the advice, you need to think in English. But nobody really explains what that means.
Exactly. People hear it all the time. Think in English. Stop translating. Use English directly. But very few people explain how the brain actually gets there.
So let's start there. What does it actually mean to think in English?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that many learners have the wrong picture in their minds. They imagine that fluent speakers never translate, not even once.
Which sounds impossible.
Because it is. Even advanced speakers sometimes translate. Even bilingual people do it.
Really?
Absolutely. The goal isn't to eliminate translation completely. The goal is to reduce your dependence on it.
That's a very different idea.
It is. Because many learners think, if I still translate sometimes, I'm doing something wrong. That's usually not true.
So what's actually happening inside the brain?
Let's imagine two possible routes. Route number one. You have an idea, you think about it in your native language, then you translate it, then you speak.
Which is what most learners do.
Exactly. Now, let's look at route number two. You have an idea, and English appears immediately. No translation step.
That sounds much faster.
Because it is. And that's what people usually mean when they say thinking in English.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say I show you a picture of a dog. What happens?
I see a dog.
Exactly. The image is already connected directly to the English word.
Interesting. So the goal is to create more direct connections.
Exactly. And that's where many learners make a mistake.
What mistake?
They learn English through translation only. Every new word gets connected to a native language word. But it never gets connected to a real image, a real situation, a real experience.
So the brain becomes dependent on translation?
Exactly. Translation becomes the bridge. And eventually, the bridge slows everything down.
Okay, let's make this practical. Suppose somebody listening wants to start thinking in English more often. What should they do?
I usually recommend a very simple experiment. For the next 24 hours, don't try to think about everything in English.
Really?
Really? That's too difficult. Instead, choose one activity. Just one.
Like what?
Making coffee, cooking breakfast, walking to work, taking a shower. And during that activity, describe what's happening in English.
So something like, I'm making coffee. The water is hot. I need more sugar.
Exactly. Simple language. No pressure, no perfect grammar.
And what's happening inside the brain when we do that?
Something very important. You're training English to become a tool for thought, not just a subject to study.
That's a powerful distinction.
It changes everything because the brain starts connecting English to daily life. instead of connecting English only to textbooks.
You know, that idea really stood out to me. English becoming a tool for thought instead of just a subject to study. Because I think that's where a lot of learners get stuck. They spend years learning English, but very little time actually using English to think. Why does that happen?
Because studying feels productive. And to be fair, it is productive. You learn new words, you learn new grammar, you understand more. Those are all good things. But there's something interesting happening. Many learners spend most of their time putting information into the brain. Very little time is spent taking information out.
And speaking depends on taking information out.
Exactly. The brain gets better at whatever it practices. If you spend 2 years recognizing English, you'll become very good at recognizing English. If you spend 2 years producing English, you'll become much better at producing English. The skill follows the training.
That's actually a really simple idea, but I don't think many people think about language that way.
Most people don't. They assume that if they keep feeding information into the brain, speaking will automatically improve. Sometimes it does, but usually much more slowly than people expect.
So if someone wants to think in English, what's the biggest mistake they should avoid?
Trying to think about complex things too early. That's probably the biggest one.
What do you mean?
A learner hears the advice, think in English, then immediately tries to discuss politics or philosophy or some complicated topic. And within 30 seconds, they're frustrated.
That sounds familiar.
Because it's a little like learning to ride a bicycle and starting on a mountain.
Not the easiest place to start.
Exactly. The brain learns best when the challenge is manageable. Start with simple thoughts, simple observations, simple descriptions. Those are easier to automate.
Something I've always wondered, when fluent speakers think, what are they actually thinking about? Because I don't imagine people walk around all day giving speeches in their heads.
No, definitely not. That's a common misconception.
Good, because that sounded exhausting.
What fluent speakers often do is much simpler. They're constantly connecting language to experiences, to situations, to emotions, to observations.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine you're walking outside. You notice the weather. You notice traffic. You notice a dog crossing the street. Those tiny observations can become language. Not because you're forcing yourself, but because English has become connected to everyday life.
So it's less about translating thoughts and more about experiencing things through English.
That's a much better way to think about it.
Something else I've heard people talk about is chunks. Language chunks. Why do they matter so much?
Because the brain loves shortcuts. Imagine you're driving somewhere familiar. You don't consciously think about every movement, every turn, every action. Many things become automatic. Language works similarly.
So chunks reduce the amount of thinking required.
Exactly. Let's take a simple phrase. To be honest. A fluent speaker doesn't build that phrase word by word. The entire chunk appears instantly.
Almost like one unit.
That's exactly what it is. And fluent speakers have thousands of these units. That's one reason they sound faster. Not because they're thinking faster, because they're retrieving larger pieces of language.
That's fascinating. I think many learners assume fluent speakers have some special ability.
Most of the time, they're just using more efficient language patterns.
Let's talk about something interesting. The voice inside our heads. Does that matter?
In your inner voice.
Yes. If your inner voice only uses your native language, then every English sentence begins with translation.
Which slows the process down.
Right. But if English starts appearing in your inner voice more often, the distance between thought and speech becomes shorter.
So how do people build that English inner voice?
One of my favorite methods is surprisingly simple. At the end of the day, replay your day in English.
That's it?
That's it. You don't need perfect grammar. You don't need perfect vocabulary. Just describe what happened, what you did, who you met, what surprised you, what went well, what didn't.
Almost like telling yourself a story.
Yes. And over time, the brain starts building stronger pathways. English becomes more available, more automatic, more familiar.
And that brings up another question I've always had. If somebody only has 15 minutes a day, what's the most effective way to train their brain to think in English?
15 minutes is actually more than enough if those 15 minutes are used well.
That's probably good news for a lot of people, because not everyone has 2 or 3 hours a day.
And honestly, most people don't need 2 or 3 hours. Consistency matters much more.
So, what would those 15 minutes look like?
I divide them into 3 parts. 5 minutes, simple.
Okay, let's start with the first 5 minutes.
The first 5 minutes are for observation. Look around you, describe what you see, what you're doing, what you're planning to do next. Keep it simple.
So, we're training English to connect with real life.
Exactly, because language is much easier to remember when it's attached to something real.
What about the second 5 minutes?
Questions. Ask yourself questions, then answer them.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. What am I working on right now? What was the best part of my day? What do I want to learn this month? What would I do if I had an extra day off? Simple questions, but they force the brain to generate language.
And the final 5 minutes?
Reflection. Talk about your day, your plans, something you recently learned, something that surprised you. Anything. The topic matters less than the habit.
You know, as we've been talking, I'm starting to notice a pattern.
What's that?
Almost everything you've recommended today involves creating language, not consuming language.
That's true. And there's a reason for that.
Which is?
Because many learners already consume a lot of English. They watch videos, they listen to podcasts, they read articles. Those activities are valuable, very valuable.
Absolutely.
But at some point, the brain needs to practice creating language too. That's where many learners spend the least amount of time. And often, that's the missing piece.
So the goal isn't to stop listening or stop reading.
Not at all. The goal is balance. Input helps build knowledge. Output helps build access. You need both.
Before we finish, there's one more thing I'd like to ask. A lot of learners say, I'll start speaking when my English is better. What do you think about that?
I understand why people feel that way. But there's a problem with that idea.
What's the problem?
Speaking isn't only the result of learning. Speaking is part of the learning process.
That's an important distinction.
Very important. Because if you wait until you feel ready, you may end up waiting a very long time. Fluency isn't something that suddenly appears one morning. It's built gradually, conversation by conversation, day by day.
You know, when we started this conversation, I thought we were going to talk about speaking.
And somehow we ended up talking about thinking.
Exactly. But maybe that's the point.
I think it is.
Because speaking doesn't begin when we open our mouths. It begins much earlier. It begins with attention, with observation, with small thoughts throughout the day.
And every time you choose to use English for one of those thoughts, you're training the brain. Even if it doesn't feel dramatic, even if nobody else notices.
I like that. Because people often imagine progress as something big, something obvious.
When in reality, most progress is quiet. A slightly faster response, a sentence that comes more easily, a conversation that feels a little more comfortable than the last one.
And those small improvements add up.
That's how fluency grows, not through one breakthrough moment, but through hundreds of ordinary moments.
So, if you're listening today, maybe don't focus on thinking in English all day. Maybe that's too much.
Start smaller.
Agreeing. Much smaller. Describe your coffee. Describe your commute. Describe your plans for tomorrow. Ask yourself a few questions. Reflect on your day. And do it consistently. That's the important part. Because the goal isn't to impress anyone. The goal is to make English feel a little more natural tomorrow than it feels today.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.